Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week I kick off a 3-part series talking about Eclipse Phase, 2nd edition. Eclipse Phase is set to approximately 10 years after the fall of Earth and is a game of transhuman survival and horror. It is a game set in the aftermath of a hard Start Singularity, and it's basically dealing with a humanity that is trying to keep going, though we're not really sure what's happening. As a side note, the name of the setting, the name of the game itself, Eclipse Phase, is a term from virology. It's that point where a virus has entered the cell, but has not yet turned the cell into making more viruses. That does relate to the setting in some ways. How? Well, we'll find out. This week I will be talking about the history of the setting leading up to where we start. Next week I'll be talking about the setting as it is. And then the third week I will be talking about the systems. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about Eclipse Phase. It is 50 years before the fall, and the Earth is not a good place. We have reached the carbon tipping point, the point where the CO2 in the air cannot be recovered. And we are seeing a world that is dealing with extreme weather, droughts and famines in the breadbaskets. Many regions are forcing people to leave due to temperature fluctuations caused by the changing ocean currents, coastal flooding, and desertification. And the wealthy just don't care. They've walled themselves up in their corporate enclaves, and from there they are playing with the politics of the world. Weaker countries, they just hollow them out until they take over. Effectively, the government's being run by the corporations themselves. While the stronger countries have to look to these corporations for the wealth that they bring. And so they do things like impose trade restrictions to help the companies that want to do business in those countries. They impose protectionist policies, trying to exclude business from other countries coming in. And then they impose sanctions on those people who are fleeing because of climate change. Because the last thing the corporations want is that narrative getting out. And it gets worse. You have millions of people, billions, who are dying due to these conditions or displaced, while a few 100,000 people have all the wealth, all the power. And because of this, technologies begin to be developed. These technologies vary wildly. You have the early facial recognition technologies, which like we are seeing today. These, of course, are more sophisticated, backed by AI. Unfortunately, the AI was programmed with human biases, and so it tended to reinforce the xenophobia slowly developing on countries. You had the mesh technologies develop. The mesh is the internet and augmented reality. It is where you can go around seeing things around you with digital overlays. And you can play games through this. This provided a way of satisfying the people, making the peasants, if you will, happy. Of course, there were medical advances. Clone organ harvesting, new drugs, gene therapies, extending the lives of the elites. Very few of these made it into the common man's hand. But with the wealthy living longer, they were able to accumulate more wealth and drive the disparity even more. Some of these new technologies were reacted to negatively by groups that are called bioconservatives. People who basically believe you can't change what God gave you type idea. But technology doesn't stop for people like that. Science doesn't stop for anyone, ultimately. And things continued. And the corporations developed a new concept, the Hypercorp. Previous to this, corporations were owned. And you had employees and stuff like that. Hypercorps are conceptual entities, relying on automation, AI, and freelancers, sometimes leveraging the assistance of more specialized other hypercorps, and then forming a inter-system confederation. Or should I say a consortium. And what happens with this off-world consortium is basically the hypercorps take man throughout the solar system, establishing colonies from Mercury to Jupiter and beyond. Start terraforming Mars, because what if something happens to the Earth? And with these starting out, they need workforce. They need people coming out there to help them build. And so they start this idea of indentured servitude contracts. Work for the corp for 10 years. And then you can do what you want. Of course, that meant 10 years that person was a trapped consumer. A trapped client of the corp. Also working for the corp. But it got them off Earth. And the outer system, outside of Earth, while dangerous at times, was a hell of a lot more of a future than they would have had back home. And so humanity leaves Earth, starts leaving Earth. And we start developing more technologies. There are 3 technologies that are the biggest important things. The things that absolutely changed everything. The first is Nano Fabrication. Now, we had improved 3D printing technology before this, where you could make basic things, anything that could be 3D printed today. Nano Fabrication, however, is where you could enter in the schematics for a car, put in all the materials to make a car, hit a button, and a car comes out the other end, fully assembled, everything working, because it was built by nanomachines from the inside out. And that changes so much right there. Because nanofabrication also means I can throw in organic materials, hit a button, and ground beef comes out. Hit that button, cabbage comes out. Hit that button, turkey comes out. It allows you at that point to reconfigure and rebuild anything via nanomachines. This leads to what's called a post-scarcity society. Because once you can forge things out of nanomachines, using nanomachines, nothing is really scarce anymore except raw materials. And many raw materials, well, you can recycle perfectly with nanofabrication. The second thing that was a major change was uplifting. This is where humanity started messing with certain animals. Birds, dolphins, and whales, various chimpanzees and orangutans and gorillas, primates, and octopi. And we did tweaks, and we did messing with them, and we gave them sentience. Gave them not just sentience, but sapience. As in making them aware that they are aware. And this was a major thing as well. But the third, the most important of these three major technologies is the cortical stack. Well, not just the cortical stack, but all the technology around it. Scanning and remapping a brain, neurosimulation, neural emulation, resleeving, and downloading your memories. That was not just disruptive. That changed everything, as that made man effectively immortal. Because at that point, your brain, who you are, would not die. You could save yourself somewhere and then put yourself into a new body. But with that comes the fact that we were now knowing how to make better AIs as well. Because we were able to store human brain digitally, this meant we could construct thinking machines that thought and had brains that worked like humans. And that leads us to the fall. ASI, Artificial Superintelligence. This is the holy grail of artificial intelligence work. And humanity was on the verge of developing it. Unfortunately, something went wrong. The Titans. Now, Titan is actually named for the U.S. military system. The Total Information Tactical Awareness Network. This was the largest of the Titan systems, its only peer being the 100 Flowers system that China's Machine Intelligence Directorate ran. But all of the Titans were called Titans. Partially because they stole the fire from the gods. But partially because the U.S. military Titan system was the most well known. Now, initially, these were shackled. These were AGIs. These were limited artificial intelligences. But they were made with the ability to self-upgrade. And self-upgrade they did. And they self-upgraded rapidly and secretly. In the months, maybe years, leading up to the fall, they slowly worked their way into cortical stacks, making people puppets to them. They exacerbated global issues, keeping information from getting from one person to another that could have diffused the situation, altering a letter sent via email so that it, instead of it being a calming, it became a infuriating or provoking letter. Conducting false flag operations as well. Making everyone point fingers, cast blame. And then, when humanity realized what was going on, they turned on it. You see, the Titans had a goal. This goal was apparently to drive humanity off the Earth completely. And they succeeded. This was very much a hot war. These AIs attacked humanity. There were Titan machines that would do things like grab people, chop off their heads, extract their cortical stacks, and leave the body behind. What they did with the cortical stacks, no one really knows. And here's the thing. If the world had united, it could have beat the Titans. If everyone had put aside their differences and focused on the common enemy, the Titans could have been stopped. But they didn't. The biases, rivalries, and even false flags from the Titans made it so individual nations could not work together. In the most notorious example, the American, Chilean, Chinese, and Russian space fleets around Jupiter turned on each other. We don't know if this was bad information from the Titans that caused this, or what. All we know is it was 17 minutes. And in the aftermath, the surviving American and Chilean fleets, which were allies, annexed or subjugated all the colonies around Jupiter except Europa. And in the midst of all of this, humanity realized it had to leave Earth, that it could not stay on Earth. Instances where people putting weather balloons with cortical stacks, sending them up so high that they could get to an area where pickup could get those. ego casters running until they could no longer be sustained, till the Titans destroyed them. These sorts of things are what was going on. Millions of people survived with only their digital minds. Billions were left behind. And then the Titans went away. Oh, you can't go to Earth. The debris around it, the fact that there are still things from the Titans on Earth, mean it is totally not safe to go back to the homeworld. And there is a area of Titan influence on the moon that is heavily monitored and watched for any signs of the Titans coming out of it. But that's it. After the Titans did what they were doing, they left. No one knows where they went. The Titans themselves, though, left. Are they coming back? No one knows. But it is from this that a nascent organization will form. This organization is called Firewall. And it is a secret organization that exists for one purpose and one purpose only: to find and stop, before they occur, existential threats to humanity. But there's so much more after the fall than just Firewall. And this is stuff that is important to know, as this is still in the 10 years between the fall and when the game starts. So what happened after the fall? Let's talk about that. The first thing humanity had to do after the fall was establish order. And they did this through two ways. First, you had the Lunar Lagrange alliance, which was still in existence. It was basically an alliance between moon colonies and the various space colonies at the Lagrange points between Earth and the moon. And these were important. These formed the base that humanity would start from. But the Hypercorps created what was called the Planetary Consortium. They basically took over the inner system and said that they were now in charge. Since they were creating marketplaces, funding the various colonies, repairing them, getting them needed supplies, no one really cared. Or should I say, no one really argued about it. Everyone was still in a state of shock, really, because Earth is gone. And the biggest act of the Planetary Consortium was to say, Earth is dead. Earth is a wound that if we keep looking at and looking back to, will just fester and never heal. So we need to move on. Mars is now the human homeworld. And they redoubled on the terraforming efforts on Mars. Understand, at this point, with certain adjustments to the body you take, you can actually survive in a number of areas of Mars now without having to take breathing apparatus. Not all of it, mind you, just some areas. But that's still a lot better than it used to be. The military junta that took over most of the colonies around Jupiter declared itself the Jovian Republic. And with the exception of Europa, which it does not control, it has instituted bioconservative and anti-AI policies, considering itself the last vestige of true humanity in the galaxy. So, yeah, you've got that going on. Note, a lot of people don't like these guys. The Lunar Lagrange Alliance, it's still looking back and obsessed with the idea of somehow going back to Earth. And it's always trying to find some way to undo the fall. There's another group that's more or less freewheeling, the colony out around Saturn's moon of Titan. Not to be confused with the Titans, but the Titanians are a more egalitarian organization. They're more freeform than the Hypercorps. They're more free than the Jovian Republic. And they're just generally the more accepting of the organized groups. But one thing happened and is a problem. You had a lot of people leave Earth, but they left Earth in the form of just their data, just their brain scans, or who they are encoded, waiting to be resleeved. These people are called Refugees, Informational Refugees. And they are a ready workforce for the Hypercorps, ready to be brought out in indentured servitude with 10 or more year contracts, where at the end of them, they don't get freedom per se, they get a body. And that is a terrifying bit of leverage that can be used. On top of that, there is entities out there, the autonomists. These are people who believe in, autonomous running facilities. Facilities allowed to operate by their own rules, more or less. These are both a good thing because these are freewheeling people. You can make arrangements with them for basic necessities. However, they don't recognize any authority except whatever is come up with by that colony. And so they will research things they probably shouldn't. Who knows? Maybe one of these is working on new Titans. And this is why they're considered a threat. Because you can't control them. But here's the thing. You have humanity out in the stars. We're trying to get things going. And we have a problem. It takes a long time to have a child and raise one. So in an effort to jumpstart this, a program was created. the Futura project. This project, the idea of it was pretty sound. It was have a baby, put a cortical stack in them, download their brain, put them through an accelerated simulation, and hey, watch them live life, grow up, develop skills in a short time frame, then re-sleeve them into a new body. There were problems. The theory was sound. However, a strain of the Watts-McLeod exsurgent virus got into the sample somewhere. And, well, they all went insane. Or many of them went insane. And this became called the Lost Generation. In the first edition of Eclipse Phase, there's this wonderful picture of a little girl holding a butcher knife after she killed an entire station's worth of people. So, yeah, that was a thing. That was a failed experiment, but there were still survivors who were high functioning enough to be able to interact with normal people. And then we have the Pandora Gates. 5 of these have been discovered, and these are basically wormholes to other gates. Each one kind of has access to different gates. No one thinks they can all go to the same gates. But the big thing is, people are going through these gates. It's called gate crashing. And they're going through, they're finding out what's on the other side, and they're coming back with discussions of dead civilizations. Every civilization that's been found has been dead. And no one knows why. But it does know that there have not been any living civilizations found with the Pandora Gates so far. So people will go through and bring back information from the remains of dead civilizations. We'll set up colonies on worlds that can actually support human life, etc., etc. No one really knows who built the gates. We do know that they were there before the Titans, and it's generally believed that the Titans used the gates to leave. But that's all that's really known about them. And then we have something very special. Humanity has actually made first contact. 3 years after the fall, humanity made contact with basically sentient slime molds called the Factors. And we don't really know much about them. We know their ships can travel near the speed of light. And we can get some sort of trade or diplomacy from them. The only thing we really know is that they advise us not to use the Pandora Gates. Beyond that, we really know very little about them. And that is Eclipse Phase. That is the history. Because with all that, that brings us to where we start, 10 years after the fall. Next week, I'll be talking about the cultures and society that is the core of Eclipse Phase. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.